Education Minister Ruel Reid, his wife and daughter, President of the Caribbean Maritime University CMU Professor Fritz Pinnock, and St. Anne Councillor Kim Brown Lawrence arrested following early morning raids to their homes. The public is interested. The Justice Minister opened the debate on the report of the Joint Select Committee which reviewed the Sexual Offences Act. We're taking a closer look at some of the factors that are of interest to you. And it's October and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Some interesting things you need to note later in the program. I am Andre Jebinson and Public Interest starts right now.
The investigation that had been embarked on is one that we had absolutely nothing to do with, nor did we at any time as a government, me as a minister and no other minister to my certain knowledge, in any way sought to influence either the manner of the investigation nor the outcome of the investigation, as indeed that would be a major breach of our commitment to the upholding and maintenance of the rule of law. What they have done is as a consequence of what they have investigated and their findings. And it is part of what makes us an established and recognized country governed by the rule of law. And that applies to everyone, no matter what position you hold. So basically, I know nothing beyond what I have been advised. I find it regrettable. I find it unfortunate because it hits at the heart of what we are all striving to achieve. And that is a stable and responsible country that adheres to all the tenets of good governance, among which at the pinnacle is the rule of law.
The major organized crime and anti-corruption agency carried out early morning raids on Wednesday at the homes of former Education Minister Ruel Reid, the head of the CMU Professor Fritz Pinnock, and Kim Brown Lawrence of the St. Anne Municipal Corporation. 5 people have been arrested, and it's been a long time coming ever since Mr. Reid was relieved of his duties following allegations of irregularities at the CMU and the Education Ministry. The opposition has called for updates and the government has said they can't get involved in the police's business. But it turns out that there is no need at this point for the government or for the opposition to be calling for updates since the arrests were made on Wednesday. We have joining us on the phone Carol Narcisse. She is a civil society advocate, and also in studio with us is Lloyd McFarlane, attorney at law. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, let me start with you.
Right,
let me start with you, Ms. Narcisse. What is your reaction to the development that took place on Wednesday morning?
Well, like many other members of the public and the citizenry, I was concerned about the long silence from the authorities with respect to what was happening with the case. Not that one wants justice to be, give a short shrift just so that we all can feel good. But in other jurisdictions, it is the done thing that periodic updates are given because the authorities, the police, etc., recognize the public interest that is at stake, especially when matters relate to public officials. So that kind of long silence is not helpful, and so I'm certainly pleased that we have a further development, but we all were of concern that on the face of it, the matters that we have heard of are matters of grave concern in terms of suspected acts of corruption.
Do you believe that this delay was because of who was involved in this particular matter? Because it's not every day that we hear that a cabinet minister is involved in things of this nature.
I don't like to speculate. So that was a pure speculation. I understand why many people feel that is the case, because we live in a context where under the SOE, ordinary Jamaicans are at risk of being detained without charge for extended periods on suspicion. We see where persons of lesser social station can be arrested and charged and brought before the courts and convicted for, acquiescence. So I understand why the public would say, well, why does it appear as if these persons are being treated differently? But as I say, it was a pure speculation. Perhaps it is that the case just took us long to investigate as we saw.
All right, Mr. McFarlane.
But this is the update. We need to demand now a culture of accountability from.
All right, before we get there though, Ms. Narcisse, before we get there though, let me bring in Mr. McFarlane to see what his reaction is to the raids that took place on Wednesday. Based on what we've heard so far, do you believe that the silence was inordinate, or it was done the proper way?
Let me just indicate, Andre, that I really have no problems with the silence, as you call it. And I've heard persons complaining about how long it has been taking, but I don't place much value on that, because if you're going to do investigations properly, you can't do it looking over your shoulder at what the public is saying. You're going to make a mess of things. And you must never hurry these things, no matter what anybody else is saying. What you have to do is make sure that your investigations reveal a proper case to be put before the courts. If you hurry and you don't have a proper case, then you've failed entirely in what you're trying to do. So we now know that they've been charged. But to just finish the point on the early morning raids, the only way those could be justified is because they were also effecting search warrants on these premises. That part is understandable. But the 5 a.m. thing is supposed to have an element of surprise in it. When you have an investigation that has been going on for months and persons are expecting to be charged, I'm not sure what you're going to be finding now. Because if, in fact, persons have incriminating items at their homes, they're not going to have them waiting for you to come there and find them. So there's a lot of drama in all of this. The real problem, however, is what the DPP said in relation to this, insofar as I've heard it on the news. And she has indicated that since the last time she spoke to the police in regards to this matter, she has had no further consultations with them, which means that they have arrested without her approval. Now, when you bear in mind the fact that the last time she spoke on it, she was making statements such as, if they want to go ahead, they must bear the consequences. It suggests that the director is not, at this point, really convinced that all the elements of the case are where they should be.
No, but when the Director of Public Prosecutions made those statements a few weeks ago, yes, she had told the FID to actually plug some gaps that were contained in their in their investigations.
Yes, and
the FID is now saying that they're confident that those gaps have been plugged.
Yes, but here's the point I'm making. It is they who have made that determination. Mm-hmm. Now, you have to understand that the director's statement is making sure that the public knows that it is not she who is claiming ownership for these arrests at this time. They can make their arrest, but it is still the DPP's office who must draw up indictments and make charges. They can be arrested under that, and they can feel sure. But the Director of Public Prosecutions is not the one who sent them out there. And if they're still searching, if they're still executing search warrants, it suggests to me that they still don't feel they have all they should. So, although persons are complaining that it is taking so long, it might be that because of all of this other pressure, they may have still acted too quickly. I don't know. But I'm saying this is what I'm seeing here in terms of all that we have. Of course, we are going to hear far more.
Ms. Narcisse, do you share those concerns? And the fact that they made the arrest without the blessing of the DPP?
Yeah, well, I heard her on another program commenting, and she was asked about these issues. She reiterated for the public benefit the fact that the police are totally in their right to proceed without any reference back to her, that they can do, that's allowed. She also stated for the public that no file had come back to her, so she doesn't know what further and better particulars there might be. She also said that that the matter doesn't necessarily come back to her office as an expect, that may or may not be a step in the process, because the local resident magistrate court, the clerk, and I don't know these things, so I would defer to the professional on the line. But the impression I got, what I understood from what she was saying, was that she doesn't have an automatic, her office doesn't have an automatic role at this point.
All right, let's speak about Professor Pinnock. He was on special leave to facilitate the investigations. He then returned he was on vacation leave and then he returned to work. Does that pose a problem for you, the fact that he was there while the investigations were taking place?
Is that a question to me?
Yes, Ms. Narcisse.
And you're asking whether I felt he should have been on leave?
Well, do you believe that he should have... Yeah, right.
Well, that I think is good practice, When somebody is faced with allegations of significant contractual irregularities, payment irregularities, etc., one would assume that there are documents within their reach that you want to secure. You want to make sure that persons on the staff who may have opinions or have knowledge, that they are not exposed to any reason to feel intimidated or any reason to feel as if they're not free to speak. So good practice says that the person removes or is asked to remove him or herself for the duration.
Okay. All right, so you're a lawyer, Mr. McFarlane. What happens next for these gentlemen? I mean, they've been charged. Where do they go from here?
I just wanted to comment that in terms of the leave situation with the professor, he had taken vacation leave some long time after this thing became public, so that if there was anything to be done, it would have been done long before he took the vacation leave. The short period in which he had returned after the vacation leave and to when he took the special leave, most of the investigations would have been done, and I don't see how it would have prejudiced much. It's just a matter of the optics of it and nothing else. In terms of what happens next, of course, they go before the courts, and the courts will be inquiring now as to the state of readiness of the files. This is a matter that will be handled by the DPP's office even though it's before the parish courts, because the fact is that the DPP's office has been in it from the beginning, and in any event, it is the type of matter.
Now, I saw a report somewhere that says the FID might actually, I guess I can call it, outsource the prosecution of the case.
It's a matter for the DPP's office. They're the ones who are going to deal with it. They're the ones who have been dealing with it. They have 4 lawyers already handling the file. There's no outsourcing going on here.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter, too, is that it is the DPP's office which will be determining what they will be indicting on. And that will be determined based on whatever else Mr. Sachs and the others have brought in to show that they've filled the gaps. If the director is not convinced that the gaps have been filled, they will not indict. So even though the charges are there, it is always a matter for the director to determine whether to proceed or not.
Yeah. All right, so long days ahead for both the DPP and the men implicated.
For lots of people.
All right, thank you, Mr. McFarlane, and thank you, Carl Narcisse, on the phone. Certainly, there will be enough time for all of that discussion. Thank you again, Mr. McFarlane, and thank you, Ms. Narcisse. Welcome back to Public Interest. I am Andre Jebinson. The debate on the report on the Joint Select Committee on the Sexual Offences Act was opened in Garden House last week. Some important aspects included marital rape, sex offenders, the age of consent, buggery, abortion, and HIV. We want to take a closer look at some of those issues, and we're being joined in studio by Dr. Gillian Mason. She's a lecturer in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at the University of the West Indies. She's also a researcher and a member of the Voices for Equal Rights and Justice. Also with us is human rights activist Glenroy Murray. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, man.
All right, so the debate was open in Garden House last week. Any major takeaways from the minister's presentation?
Well, I guess as expected, there was a mix of things that we hoped to see, because both Glenroy and myself are members of Voices for Equal Rights and Justice. And some things that we wish to see which were not there, and some that were kind of in between.
What did you want to see that wasn't there?
Well, for me, for me, I was disappointed about their recommendation regarding HIV, and their recommendation is that there should be a special law for persons who knowingly or willingly have HIV and pass it on, have sexual intercourse with other persons.
Without disclosure.
Without disclosure.
Right.
So that is a very sore point for us, and we, as was argued or as was presented to them, that this is not the way kind of the world is going, because having such a law can lead to persons not willing to be tested, because I can't knowingly pass on the virus if I don't know that I have it.
Right.
So that was the main argument against it, as well as that there are existing laws which could be used if there was the belief that somebody had knowingly tried to kill somebody by infecting them with the HIV virus.
No, but couldn't the converse to that be true as well? I need to find out my HIV status so that my partner will not be affected if I do in fact have the virus.
Basically, but the reality is that that's not the impact of criminalizing legislation across different parts of the world. And so when we look at the actual standard put forward by the UN agencies around HIV and human rights, criminalization in this kind of way is not recommended. We already have common law precedent in different cases, like the King against Dika, the Crown against Kanzani, which create provisions for someone who willfully transmits to be criminalized if that is proven and is required. So to make it legislative kind of turns a lens in a kind of way on an issue where the public health response is thwarted. But I'd like to go back a little about the original question. I think one of the major things that came out of it was an invitation by the Minister of Justice, Delroy Chuck, to revisit the position on the referendum regarding whether or not the Buggery Law should be amended. And that's only relevant in my mind because the definition of sexual intercourse, which is limited to vaginal penetration by a penis, which therefore implicates the definition of rape, which is a gender-specific definition which says only men can rape women, and only when they forcibly penetrate their vaginas with their penises, and that has implications throughout the entire sexual offences regime. Right. And so the issue of buggery touches and concerns, and the definition of sexual intercourse touches and concerns the whole system, because in 2009, when the law was passed, they defined sexual intercourse and rape and grievous sexual assault so as not to touch the Buggery Law, because if they touch it, there's a fear that it will no longer be protected by the Savings Law clause. And so the fact that the Minister of Justice says, let's rethink the referendum position, means that there's an opportunity to invite conversation and more strengthened advocacy to widen the definition, because to define our laws just to keep the Buggery Law in place is really unfortunate because of the impact that has on actually protecting Jamaicans from sexual violence.
So the main point of what you just said was what?
So the recommendations were they did not address the major issues, which is how we define sexual intercourse in the Act and how do we define rape in the Act.
Okay.
And the reason why they did not do that is because they did not want
I
to
understand
touch
that. So I was trying to, okay. All right, but I mean, this whole idea of the referendum now, is that something that you would be in favor of?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No. Right.
Why?
Absolutely. Because referendum should not be used, I think, I'm of the view, for these kinds of human rights issues, because human rights are about protecting everyone on an equal basis. And so if the majority, because human rights is what steps in when the majoritarian politics frustrates those of a minority. And so if human rights issues are being put to a majoritarian type of mechanism, then what's the point? Human rights are a baseline standard.
You share that view, Dr. Mason?
Yes, I'm not for the referendum either. But on the same point, though, I must say that I did appreciate that the minister invited members of parliament to examine the whole issue. So he wasn't saying that we should go straight to referendum. And I thought that was very important that he had that kind of caveat in there. He invited them to look at the law, to examine it, to make their own suggestions or recommendations. Though, unfortunately, I do believe that the leaning is still towards a referendum. But no, I wouldn't support it.
But don't you accept, though, what the minister said about, because as it is right now, as a nation, the nation is really against any repeal of the Buggery Act, right? So don't you give him that leeway to say, all right, let us see how the nation is feeling about this particular issue?
The reason why... go ahead.
The problem with referenda in general is that it's kind of easy to get into the kind of populist view, and I don't think that is the way that law should be made, right? That it's not just a matter of what do the majority want. There has to be a kind of logic and a process to it as to where do you want our country to go, what do you want us to represent. And so if you just go with referendum where people may be voting solely on, what they hear, and they may not, and oftentimes people do not spend the time to really get both sides of the argument and then make a decision.
No, but shouldn't your law reflect your people?
So, to that point, I think it's critical to underline that there have been many instances in which law is passed that is not favorable to a population. Right. Casino legislation was not generally favorable to a large section of the society, particularly the church community, and that was passed. And NIDS was passed among significant controversy and only struck down in the courts for human rights reasons, including its implication for the right to privacy. And so the notion that a government does not and should not in certain instances make laws for the benefit of minorities is ridiculous, because democracy is more than just about majoritarian politics. It's about, and especially in our constitutional democracy, which enshrines human rights as one of its supreme standards within the Charter of Rights, then it has to be guided on beyond just what the majority wants. We have higher principles that we've acceded to at the international and regional levels, and in our constitution, that must guide how we legislate.
But if you made the changes as as is, though, wouldn't you? The minister said in his presentation that it would be could be construed as an implied repeal of the Buggery Act.
Right.
So even if you don't do it in this particular case of the SOA, I mean, there could be other opportunities to do the repeal if that's what you want.
But the issue is not necessarily the repeal of that particular piece of legislation, and I think the point needs to be clear. What we're talking about is the fact that if a man rapes his son, the law says it is not incest. Only when he rapes his daughter, it is incest. That is ridiculous. And so because of the desire to keep a specific law, the entire sexual offences regime is compromised. And so what we're saying is you're not actively using the Buggery law to punish, to scrutinize, and to survey LGBT people in a kind of way. Therefore, there is no need to treat it as sacrosanct when it implicates the rest of our laws. So actually change the rest of our laws. And if someone makes a challenge before the courts, that is a matter for the courts to deal with. But the point really is that the Savings Law Clause is meant to place things before Parliament. It is not meant for Parliament to use it as an excuse not to legislate for the benefit of all Jamaicans.
All right, so your recommendation then, Dr. Mason, is what precisely? How should the government treat, because you presented to the Joint Select Committee
that's part
as well.
of Verge.
So what would be your ideal treatment for this particular matter?
Well, as Glenroy was saying, the real issue is how we're defining sexual intercourse and rape. And that is actually what we were moving to have amended, so that it would not be limited to vaginal penile intersection only, but other forms as well. And this is why this whole thing came up about in terms of how it might affect our so-called Buggery law. So our position still is that the definition of sexual intercourse should change. The definition of rape would change, and that would allow for a gender-neutral law as well.
Okay. Yeah, we're almost at the break, but I want to touch back on the HIV issue because I know I've read instances where people use HIV as a weapon. As in they know that they're infected and because you might have done them wrong or whatever, they try to infect someone else. Why shouldn't that be criminal?
It already is.
That's
So what we're saying is there's already provision for it within our legislation. It doesn't. So criminalization or that kind of legal criminalization doesn't achieve what you want to achieve because largely. So there might, the instance of the vindictive person living with HIV is a minority. You don't want to refocus resources which should be put towards prevention strategies, which should be put towards treatment strategies. Because the truth is, if someone is positive but undetectable, meaning they're at a stage where their viral load is extremely low and they cannot pass on the virus, then this is not an issue for you. We do not have enough resources locally to actually address the needs of all persons living with HIV, nor are we in a place where we actually provide services to everyone. We're not at our 90-90-90 targets, which is our set of targets that we agreed to, that by next year, 90% of persons living with HIV would know their status, 90 of them that know their status would be on treatment, and 90 of those persons who are on treatment would be virally suppressed. And I think more resources and attention should be focused there, as opposed to fairy tale strategies based on the notion that potentially persons living with HIV are so vindictive that they're going to spread the virus, because what actually leads to the spread of the virus is stigma and discrimination and locking people away from resources.
By the way, how far are we with the 90-90-90 goal? I know that in terms of people knowing their status, or people who are on treatment, one of them is in the high 90s. Which one is it?
So knowing your status, based on the estimates of the number of persons living with HIV in Jamaica, we have reached or almost reached that first 90. The other two are a bit wanting, and so it's very unlikely that we're going to reach.
What number?
Don't have the exact statistics on me right now. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Let's take a break. You're watching Public Interest on PBC Jamaica. We'll be coming right back. Welcome back to Public Interest. I am Andre Jebinson. We're continuing our discussions on the report on the Joint Select Committee in relation to the Sexual Offences Act. Before we went on break, we were talking about that which is bad, but I mean, there are good things as well. So now we want to pick up our discussion with Dr. Mason and Mr. Murray. What are some of the good things that the minister said last week?
Well, the one thing that I will speak about that I really feel good about is the removal of Section 5, which had to deal with marital rape. That needed to have been removed. It discriminated really against married women.
So let me give our viewers a brief excerpt from what the minister said.
Sure.
Sexual Offences Act provides that certain conditions must be met before it is determined that a husband can rape his wife. The committee recommended that those conditions must be removed to obtain one qualification for rape,
right.
and that is non-consensual sex.
That's right. Yes.
So you were saying?
Right. So as I was saying, it really disadvantaged, put married women at disadvantage,
Right.
because they had all these conditions that kind of had to be met before they could make a claim of rape at the hands of their husband. So that removal, I'm really glad to see that that has been recommended, and I hope that the Parliament will follow through.
Right.
with
But
it
what
as
took
well.
us so long though? I mean, that's just archaic for me. I mean, in this day and age, why can't a woman? So what you're essentially saying, and I heard someone make the point that someone who is in what you call it now, you're not married, a common law relationship, right?
Right.
You can actually
Charge
refuse.
for it.
Yes.
Okay.
You can
charge
your partner.
Right.
Right.
And a married woman is basically
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
subjected to the will of her husband.
Right. So that clause was actually put in when the act was formed. So it's not. It has been here all along. But
Right.
this is the first revision or re-examination, I should say, of the act. So this is our first opportunity to lobby again for its removal.
Right.
But yes.
I think the point must be made, as you said, that back in 2009, when that law was passed, all our sexual offences legislation were being moved from different areas within common law, different areas within different pieces of legislation into one place. And I think they didn't get everything right that first time, or they made certain concessions because of whatever interest existed at the time. So now we have an opportunity years later, well, it's going to be 10 years since the act was passed, well, it's now 10 years since the act was passed, but to kind of review all the things that we didn't get right, all the ways in which we took a step back, and for the Joint Select Committee to actually wholesalely accept that recommendation, I think was a massive move forward. And that wasn't the only way in which they did that. They were very open to a lot of the recommendations that were made on the Domestic Violence Act. And the overall conclusion, though, was that they needed to review it in a more fulsome way. But they were definitely open to actually defining what domestic violence is, because the legislation didn't have a legal definition of domestic violence. And talking about different forms of domestic violence that weren't touched on before, such as financial abuse or sexual abuse, which was not even captured in the original, within the framework that they had before, and increasing the penalties for breaching your protection orders. So that was a great move forward. And even within the Child Care and Protection Act, there were other substantive recommendations that they made, as well as the inclusion of stalking as an offense in the Offences Against the Persons Act.
Talk a little bit more about financial abuse.
Right.
Because, I mean, in our context, that's a big problem.
Right. So what we found was that in other jurisdictions, financial abuse, which is basically refers to a set of behaviors where control over the financial resources in the home was being used as a tool of isolation, manipulation, coercion. And it was recognizing that that is a form of abuse, and therefore giving women legal protection to respond to, and not just women, but largely women are affected by this, a legal response to those occurrences, and recognizing that abuse does not necessarily have to happen in a certain form.
Based on the line of research that you've done, Dr. Mason, what are some of these tangible, clear and present occurrences that they're trying to correct in some of these
in terms of domestic violence?
Right. Not just domestic violence, but just marital rape and all of that.
Right. Well, marital rape is one of them. Another area that we are glad, well, at least I am half glad, is regarding the, not so much the age of consent, but the,
Close in age.
Close in age
Exemption.
close in age exemption, so that they're maintaining, they're recommending that the age of consent remain at 16,
Right.
but they're recommending also a close of age of 4 years, a range of 4 years. And I'm a little bit troubled by that. I think 4 years is too broad, because that would mean that a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old could have could have consensual sex.
No, the 15-year-old is covered under the age of consent, or
Right. So the point of having the idea of the close of age is that
yeah.
adolescents, often young adolescents under 16, often have sex with each other, and so you don't want to criminalize them, because they could be criminal.
No, what I'm asking, what I'm asking is, if a 19-year-old has sex with a 15-year-old, that is below the age of consent.
Right.
So the 15-year-old can't necessarily consent to have sex with a 19-year-old. So why
currently-
isn't that rape?
So currently under the Sexual Offences Act, they would have what they call the young man's defense,
Right.
which allows them to say that they did not know that the person was under 16 if they are within a certain age range. So I think the context of the close-in age exemption would be to not have a situation like that lead to
Criminal treatment,
and to divert it to other forms of judicial responses because of the disruptive impact of the criminal justice system in people's lives. I think Dr. Mason is making the point that we have to be careful what we're actually keeping away from judicial scrutiny with the close-in age exemption.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the point you're making when you're saying that
The 4 years I think is too broad. I think 2 years would have been more in keeping, I think, with the spirit, where this is really a boyfriend-girlfriend, an approved boyfriend-girlfriend situation in terms of the closeness of their age. I think 4 years just gives a little bit too much leeway.
Okay, you believe that the age of consent should remain at 16?
I personally don't have a problem with that. I mean, there are implications in terms of other issues, but the recommendation from some was to raise it to 18, which I also have issues with, in terms of, again, the real practice on the ground, that our first age of intercourse for most is, or not for most, the average is like 13 or 14 for girls and 12 or 11 for boys.
But isn't the idea to dissuade, though?
But you don't need to use criminal law to
Exactly.
dissuade, and I think we need to
Exactly.
be very mindful of that. The impact of criminalization is real, and so we have to think about better ways outside of the kind of colonial tendency to punish people through law, which has a history of colonial violence with the ways in which we trap black bodies and put them into jail for errant sexual behavior. There are many ways and there are many sets of resources that the state can mobilize to respond to early childhood sexuality, and that does involve actually implementing comprehensive sex ed within our schools, which has not been done. So rather than educate people, we punish them, and that behavior, that tendency needs to be investigated.
Right, but then when you go down that route of sexual education, you open a whole other can of worm, because I mean we've seen where that has caused issue in the past with JFJ, for example, and other agencies.
Right. So that's the point. So yes, there is room to work out what is age appropriate for children and what is needed to enable them to make better decisions. But the studies show that sex ed is actually what leads them to delay first sexual experience if it is voluntary. And also gives them the tools to know when they are being sexually groomed, to know how to navigate certain experiences that could lead to forced sexual contact. And so we have to just be mindful of that, even in the conversations about what we're teaching our children, to recognize that the answer, the better and safer answer, and the answer that will lead to the results that we want, is to educate, not punish.
And so I just to add to that, I think that, yes, we do have to have those conversations, and those conversations are very difficult as to how we're going to educate our children about sex, and but the conversations need to be had. And so the move to just criminalize is almost like the easier route. Easier in the short term, but probably not in the long term. So we put the efforts into the resources to educate our children, we'd be better off.
All right, so part of the question I was asking you earlier, Dr. Mason, is based on your line of work, social work, psychology, what do you see actually happening on the ground, and how legislation like the Buggery Act, the Sexual Offences Act are depriving people of really their best life?
Right. Okay, that's we want to be here for hours. Well, even picking up right where we left off in talking about sex education and what happens with our adolescents and what we teach our adolescents. As I said, the age at which children or youngsters first start having sex is really early, and that is what is happening on the ground, and we're not recognizing it. We are maybe living a little bit in fairyland as to what we would love for it to be, and thinking that by, again, legislation, we can force it to be so, but that is not so because it's not how humans are behaving. So what we need to do is recognize what is happening and respond appropriately, which is to educate.
All right. Anything to add, sir?
I think Dr. Mason kind of said, or made the point strongly about, what is happening on the ground as it relates to adolescent sexual engagement. And I think a lot of what was considered by the Joint Select Committee was kind of through the recent Women's Health Survey.
Well, that came out after.
Yeah, but actually they mentioned it.
Okay.
So I think because it took so long for them to produce the
right.
report, they had time to look at it was a Women's Reproductive Health Survey?
No, Women's Health Survey.
Women's Health Survey.
Right,
that
came out in 2016.
spoke to the prevalence of rape,
True.
the prevalence of sexual violence,
Yes.
and intimate partner violence.
Yes.
And that did feed into how they kind of responded to some of the concerns that were raised.
All right, so best efforts, your group would have presented to Parliament. I know it's in the hands of politicians. Are you confident that they will take this to where it needs to go? Because, at the end of the day, you can make all sorts of recommendations, but at the end of the day, 63 plus 21 people will vote on this.
Wow, that's a big question. I do hope that they have heard. Again, yes, the committee has submitted its report, and as I said, again, I commend Minister Chuck for mentioning, he mentioned also getting a report from Family Planning Board, which was again speaking to the HIV issue. And so he was pointing out, even though this is a recommendation of the committee, he was encouraging the members of Parliament to look at these different reports, look at the submissions from the groups before they make a decision. And I really do hope they take him up on that offer. That I think will put us in better stead for getting the kind of legislation we need.
And Glenroy?
I think it's important to understand that the Joint Select Committee process is the preparation for the race, and the race starts now. Know that it is before Parliament, and they have the recommendations, which are not set in stone. They are very much just recommendations. We, as a civil society, as a country, have an opportunity to engage our ministers, engage our politicians, make them aware of the lived experiences of Jamaicans and why the laws must respond to those experiences, as opposed to responding to highly often touted narratives that are not always based in fact.
All right, Dr. Mason, Mr. Murray, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And when we come back on public interest, we're going to be speaking about breast cancer, since it's October and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Welcome back to Public Interest. In this segment, we're looking at breast cancer since it's October, and this is the period in which we generally take a closer look at that particular cancer. Looking at the stats for the new cases in 2018, 13.3% of new cases in 2018 were breast cancers. Men, not out of it altogether. Prostate cancer, 17.8% new cases in Jamaica in 2018. But for this program, we're taking a look at breast cancer. And we have joining us on the program is Shirley Brown. She is the fundraising and PRO at the Jamaica Cancer Society. And also with us is head of surgery at Kingston Public Hospital, Dr. Lindbergh Simpson. Miss Brown, it seems to be a problem in Jamaica. And what's taking place with that? I mean, how are we looking in terms of trajectory? Are we heading in the right direction or are we heading in the wrong direction?
Well, thank you for having me. Breast cancer remains the #1 cancer in Jamaica. For me, I've had the experience of working at the Jamaica Cancer Society, and it's the #1 cancer among women. And we find for ourselves there that in excess of 8,000 women access our mammography screening annually. Now, there's almost 500,000 women who are 40 and over in Jamaica who are eligible for screening. However, screening is not accessible to most women, depending on where they live in Jamaica. Most persons will have to get screened at a private facility, the Jamaica Cancer Society or the University Hospital of the West Indies. Unfortunately, for most women, when they do seek out screening, it is at late stage, because most persons will sit and watch if they find a lump in their breast to hope that the lump will disappear. And when invariably they seek medical attention, it tends to be at very late stage. So for us, and I'm not sure if Dr. Sims will agree with me, we will see for another 5 to 10 years, continuous growth in the numbers of women that are diagnosed, just to the fact that there's a lack of access to screening, and women tend not to get screening where they can get it. For example, if women are in Kingston, there are many radiology centers in Kingston that offer screening. Many women, they wait until they have a problem, as I said before, and then they access screening, at which point in time, if it's not surgery, the disease would have spread to other areas of their body. So unfortunately for most persons, they would not survive. And in other areas where women do not have access, then the education and the awareness is such that they are not hearing it. And so the call to action is being lost, and many women don't access screening based on that.
All right, Dr. Simpson, 7,348 new cases, 974 of them breast cancers. Ms. Brown already explained the difficulties, access to screening and so on, and people just not taking it seriously enough. Is there a problem with breast cancer in Jamaica?
Thank you very much for having me, Andre. And this is very important. Programs like these, which put the spotlight on breast cancer, are important. And what I want to say is that the number, if we're doing it correctly, the number will continue to increase, because we are still not yet, we're still seeing the tip of the iceberg as it relates to breast cancer, because culturally as a nation, there are a lot of prevailing myths which prevent a lot of our women from accessing care. Women are scared that they don't know why breast cancer occurs. They don't want to present for screening because they're worried about the screening. Just today, I was at clinic at KPH about 3 hours ago. A lady's telling me she didn't go for screening because she was afraid that the screening would cause cancer, which is incorrect. So one of the things we really need to do as we push forward to improve the care of breast cancer is to challenge some of the sociocultural misconceptions which are out there. So programs like this is very important. You know, one of the things I was talking about at Cancer Society, people think maybe there's a lump in your breast on their arm, that it's a deodorant which is causing it, which is really unlikely. People think that if there's nobody in their family with breast cancer, then this lump in their breast can't be cancer, so they delay in seeking treatment. And sometimes they're afraid of what the treatment might be. In 2019, women don't have to be afraid that once they have cancer, they will lose their breasts. There are lots of people who we can treat, and depending if we catch it early, we have a lot of options for treatments. It doesn't have to be that your breast is taken off.
So what do women do then? I know some people, there are women who self-diagnose, well, not self-diagnose, but they feel and they try to find out what's happening underneath there. So what would you say to women to do? I mean, you mentioned over 40 and over, but I mean, it could be younger as well. So what do women do in the meantime?
We do have disease presenting younger in our population. And internationally, like in the US, the average age of diagnosis is 60. Whereas when our data, we're more like at 52. So we do have women in their 30s, in their 40s who have breast cancer. The most important point I want to make is any woman who notices a change in the appearance of their breast. Because oftentimes women will come and say, oh, they saw a lump, but it wasn't hurting them, so it didn't come. So once you feel something feels different, or it looks different, please go to a healthcare practitioner, go to your clinic, or if you want to go to your private doctor, go to somebody for them to have a look, examine, once there's something which is different about your breast. Don't delay.
And Ms. Brown, how does the Cancer Society come into all of this, fit into the whole picture of screening, of helping women or men in the general case to be on the alert for any particular cancer?
Sure. Well, for us, we always say the best protection against cancer is early detection. And the Cancer Society does education. We do national awareness programs. We do, of course, programs such as these to just raise the level of awareness and encourage screening. We offer screening to women. We say to women, once you are young, start doing your breast self-examinations monthly. We say do your clinical breast examination at least twice per year, and once you reach the age of 40, you start screening by doing mammograms annually. And we mark that by saying to women also that there are certain days in the year that are special to you. Your birthday, for example, Valentine's Day, no better way to love yourself than to do your breast examination or your clinical breast examination or do your annual mammogram. Because one of the key factors, and Doc alluded to it in his statement earlier, is that early detection is important for persons who are diagnosed with breast cancer. One, they have a better outcome of treatment with the disease. Two, they're not going to die anytime soon, maybe from something else right now. So it's very important for persons to understand that. And then there are other options now where treatment is concerned, where women do not have to be fearful of losing their breasts. But how are you going to be around for your family? How are you not going to lose your breast if you're not screening for the disease and you're not practicing vigilance? And it's not just for us to say this as women, because I'm a woman, I'm sitting here, I do practice doing my mammograms annually, but we have to take our sisters and our mothers and our friends and our cousins and we make a party of it and say to women, on this particular day, all of us are going to get our mammograms done.
Yeah, and I hear you, and sometimes accessibility is a problem, but also cost is a problem. People will probably just not do it simply because they can't afford. What are the costs that we're looking at, and how do you get around some of these costs?
Well, we start with costs. For most persons, we'll say an average between $4,000 to about $9,000 for a mammogram. And it depends on where persons access screening. For us at the Cancer Society, the cost is $4,000 because we do have a subsidized screening cost based on the fundraising activities that we have. And we use those funds to help us offset the cost of supplies associated with the mammogram. But what we want persons to understand is that we are saying to you, yes, get screened, and there are prohibitive factors, and cost is one of them. But it's very important to you, and I think that if we have an idea of trying to understand what the significant cost factors are and try and probably save towards, at the Cancer Society, we're able to offer free screening because of the partnerships that we have throughout the year. You know, the National Health Fund, the Chase Fund, and other corporate entities that come out and really support our efforts. And as a practice, we don't turn patients away from our gates because that just might be the lady who is leaving with the disease. So we tend to encourage women, if you are not able to afford it, let us know and we always assist. But the problem that we have is that we are in Kingston and there are other screening centers island-wide. And the costs, while persons will think it's prohibitive, many persons out there are still helping persons. I know, for example, there's one particular center for the month that's giving a 50% discount on the cost of their screening for the month of October. And people are just to listen out and take advantage of these. The screening is available at the University Hospital of the West Indies as well, mammography screening. So persons, you know, the cost of doing your hair and your nails and all of that is something that women love. But we're to love ourselves as well, and we're trying to, you know, put aside some funds and save towards it and get our mammograms done.
How about at the public facilities? Because I hear at KPH and at your hospital and so on, but the person in Westmoreland, the person in Trelawney and so on, boy, by the time you take a bus and come to Kingston or whatever to get a mammogram, that alone is a factor that would say, you know, let me stay at my house. So, I mean, how is access across the island?
You're quite right, Andre, and that is a challenge, and that is something we're working on. The Ministry of Health actually we're in the middle of drafting national guidelines to look at certain non-communicable diseases, and one of those is breast cancer. So one of the things we are looking at as we draft the guidelines is the cost of implementing these guidelines. And we can't say we're serious about getting breast cancer under control unless we improve access, because you're perfectly right. They're not only Kingston and St. Andrew, from the the person who's at the farthest point in Jamaica from Kingston, they should be able to access a mammogram, or else we won't really start to bring the disease under control.
Sorry,
So
is it only that the screening can only be done in Kingston at public facilities?
No, they have private facilities all
No,
across the island.
what I'm asking is the public facilities, the only access to that is in the corporate area?
In the corporate
In the
area.
corporate area
Yes.
at the moment.
At the moment.
So that's one of the things we're trying to build. We're drafting the national guidelines, so that what we're hoping is that we'll be able to put mammographic facilities available across the island, or else we're really not going to get this disease under control. Because you're right, we want every woman to feel like they can access.
And then, you know, Andre, for us at the Cancer Society, we do partnership with other radiology centers island-wide. So, for example, we were blessed in 2018 with a grant from the Chase Fund to offer 1,000 free mammograms. So we partnered with churches, we partnered with social groups, we partnered with various clubs and other institutions to identify these women who are in need. And then we sought radiology centers that would offer the discounted cost of screening to these women. And some women we shuttled in from Portland into Kingston. We took them from St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland into Mandeville, etc., to have the access to the screening at these facilities that we in turn paid for them. But we also had a mobile screening program up to 2015 with a mobile mammography unit that went across the island of Jamaica and provided access to screening. Unfortunately, that truck is now at the end of its life cycle, so we are trying to replace that unit.
But what was the uptake for that? Like, were people actually?
Yes, certainly. Well received. We had it for over 13 years working across the island, doing multiple stops at various locations, screening in excess of about 15,000 women annually.
Yeah, we run out of time, but isn't
yes.
that public-private partnership something the government can do? I know they've done it in other areas, like the drug program and other services that the government offers. So isn't that something that the government could also look at in the meantime until you're able to deck out your facilities with these machines?
Certainly, I mean, I wouldn't want to, I don't know if I have the permission to speak for the government, but certainly that is one of the things when we finish draft the guidelines is to say, look, we're going to need to be doing 40,000 mammograms. How are we going to do it? And then that, I think, there's another stage in the process where we say, how are we going to fund 40,000 mammograms, whether it be 2 mammography machines and public-private partnership for the rest. These are all ideas which I think definitely we have to look forward.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Simpson. Very important information that you had to share there. And thank you for watching this edition of Public Interest. On behalf of the entire production team, I'm Andre Jebinson, wishing you a good evening.